Camila.
Hi, nice to meet you, Bruna. Adele. Sarah. Which organization are you with? Sorry? Which organization are you with? Ecocentric? Your face is very familiar. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk about corporate sustainability. This conference is part of Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi's program for COP28 and is a testament to the engagement of the university for sustainability and climate change. So we're very happy to have the speakers with us today. The conference was organized by Dr. Beatrice, and I will leave her the floor so she can introduce the speakers and we can start with the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manon. On behalf of Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi, I would like to thank our speakers for being here and all of our participants for coming today as well. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I will start by introducing our speakers. So first, Dr. Chantal Lynn Carpentier, Head of the Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development Branch of the Division of International Trade and Commodities of the United Nations Conference on Trade and, and Development, UNCTAD. Yes, so think of UNCTAD. It's easier. Yeah, that's right. And then we have Adèle Guido, who is the program lead of the UN Global Compact. She's responsible for the UAE network. And Adèle is also a Sorbonne alumna, so we're very happy to have her here with us. We also have Dr. Camila Quental. Camila is a visiting professor in business, organizations and society at New York University in Abu Dhabi. Also, Bruna Bastos. Bruna has over 15 years of experience in sustainability. She is a social entrepreneur and an advisor to businesses in sustainability practices. And also, we have our moderator with us today, who is Sarah Lala. Sarah is an award-winning social entrepreneur. She's based in Dubai. Sarah is the founder of Ecocentric, which is an online platform for all food ordering without packaging waste. It would be great to hear more about it later, Sarah. So thank you so much again for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'll give the floor for Sarah now. Thank you so much.
I don't know whether we should be standing. I think I would like to ask Chantal to go ahead with her presentation. Right? So we're going to go in a round starting from you till Bruna with your presentations.
Okay. So good afternoon, and sorry for being late. I've been asked to talk about what the program that UNCTAD is doing on biotrade, so trade and biodiversity. And, you know, let me start by saying that 40% of the world economy is actually derived directly from biodiversity and the ecosystem provided by biodiversity. And so fostering sustainable business model that are nature-based is very important, especially for developing country and especially for developing country rich in biodiversity. We also have project on plastic substitute and on sustainable export from African country, South-South trade and environmentally preferable services. But right now, I'm just going to focus on the biotrade to give an example and can speak to these issues later as if there's an interest. I also would like to mention that though that biodiversity is very important, it's also identified trade as one of the major drivers for the loss of biodiversity. So the question is, how do you turn the negative into a positive, right? And this is exactly why UNCTAD, WTO, ITC, and the ICC were at this COP. And with the presidency, for the first time, we organized a trade day to show that trade is necessary to achieve the climate change, but it's not sufficient. It needs to be also aligned with the SDGs, because if you don't stack the E and the S, we will not get there. So that's pretty much the message. So let me tell you a bit more about the biotrade work. We've been doing the biotrade work since 1996. And we mix entrepreneurship, women's economic empowerment, biodiversity, livelihood production. So we mix all of these things together. And it's a set of principles, 7 principles actually. And we work closely with the CBD. So some of these principles will, if you know the CBD, the Convention on Biodiversity, you will not be surprised. So the principles are conservation of biodiversity, pretty obvious. Sustainable use of biodiversity. There's a lot of push for setting aside and conserving biodiversity, but a lot of countries need to make a livelihood. And there's also, once you set aside one of those resources, you need to be able to enforce those rules. But if there's an incentive by the local communities to protect those resources, because they get this sustainable livelihood from it, then you don't have to spend as much money to enforce these laws, right? So sustainable use, fair and equitable sharing of the benefits, socioeconomic sustainability, so it needs to be sustainable, legal compliance with all the laws, respect for the right of actors involved, and clarity on the right of the use and access to the natural resources. So that's very, those are very clear. And the biotape, they're implemented by many partners and practitioners across the globe in almost 100 companies. Unfortunately, not the UAE, so maybe we can work with our Global Compact colleague here to change that. And it includes several sectors, such as food, like quinoa or cacao, personal care, phytopharma, fashion, garment, like alpaca fibers, and sustainable tourism, among others. There's a lot of wind here, so. And why do we care? We think it's important because it basically creates job and livelihoods. It supports the development of businesses and entrepreneurs. Often they're women, they're migrants, they're in rural area where there's little economic opportunities. And it helps developing countries to diversify their economy and connect to international supply chain, but in a standing of power as opposed to a standing of a taker of a low price because it's a commodity, right? And we just came out of a session at the last session of the Trade House today, because we also had the Trade House, on social and solidarity economy and trade. And because many of those women are organized in cooperatives, in self-help group, indigenous peoples group, and that our business model that are informal or sometimes not recognized by the state, and therefore they can't benefit from the state measures that are put in place. An example was given by our colleague from Climb Eat, and because he's not for profit, he could not get a mortgage. So the way we value the role of people that solve our problem need to change, and this is one of the goals of the BioTrade program. I'll give you just two examples, and then, so I don't dominate the discussion, but to give you a sense of the size and the value of those. So in the Brazilian Amazon, the Ucuuba tree was threatened by illegal logging, right? Because people come and log and sell the log for a price. Natura Cosmetic, who many of you know from Brazil, and BioTrade practitioners came together to identify cosmetic potential for the Cuba tree and the berry that comes out of the tree, as opposed to having to cut the tree, right? And then basically through that partnership develop a value for the berries that now these women can go and collect and sell to Natura Cosmetic. And through a benefit sharing contract that we oversee to make sure that it was a fair sharing of benefits. Now there's over 1,000 local harvester family that are earning three times more from collecting the berries every year, as opposed to cut the tree and having a one-time income. And basically this conserve an area of 60,000 hectares and save more than 5,000 trees per year. And this is a tree that was endangered. In Vietnam, the sustainable harvesting and sale of benzoin gum and is under the BioTrade principle, and it conserves ecosystem by avoiding logging in general, improving natural habitat from across 31 provinces throughout Vietnam. It increased the revenue by $300 to $450 per season, which is a lot of money for these communities. And it helped preserve the trees, prevent deforestation, maintain the local biodiversity, and empower these women in these areas. So I'll stop here and open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. Maybe before we go for the next presentation, I would like to ask you one question, and then we move on. So, do you have any mechanism or processes in place to ensure that the individuals and the small businesses comply with the BioTrade and principles and the criteria?
Yes, indeed. So there's several things that we do. One is we are organizing a network around the world of and so in Ecuador, for instance, there was an institution that was created to ensure that business actually conform to those biotrade principles. In other countries, it will be different type of institution, or it would be more like an NGO that is that we're working with that ensure that those principles. We work also directly with the companies that procure from those groups to ensure that they have a responsibility and that they do it, such as Wedella. I get my hair colored. Wedella is a good one. So, and it's all natural products, as well as Natura and some others. So yeah, the transparency in the market is extremely important. But we're looking now to scale that. And we're working, and I should have said SECO, and we thank SECO, the Swiss agency, for their financial support. And we want to expand to trade and biodiversity in general, and just not the biotrade, because there's so many opportunities. And we should recall, because we're at the COP, that biodiversity, climate change, and pollution are intricately linked. And we need to address these triple environmental crises together.
And now Adele is going to go ahead with her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I work for the United Nations Global Compact, but the UAE office. Anyone familiar with the UN Global Compact in the room? Okay, so a bit less than half. Good that I'm here. So the United Nations Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. And it's essentially a call to businesses to align their business operations with 10 universal principles on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And since 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals. It's a special initiative of the United Nations, which was created back in 2000 by former Secretary General Kofi Annan, with the concept that the objective of the United Nations will not be achieved without the contribution of the private sector. We know that the private sector is the one that implements regulations, policy on the ground, and therefore drive change. They have the most impact, and they also have the possibility to drive the most significant change at scale. So the way we do that really is, first and foremost, we guide companies to set targets, not self-declared target, but target aligned with international framework, with policy, regulations, and we ask them to report on them, to report on the progress. So we take those companies accountable. We ask CEOs to actually sign a commitment letter that gets them to commit to align their business's operation with the 10 principles and the Sustainable Development Goals. We also recognize that businesses have a significant drive to really influence as well policy and regulation, so there is an advocacy piece to it, which is why we really want to make sure within the UN Global Compact that every company we engage are equipped with the skills, the resources, and the knowledge so they can really work on the Sustainable Development Goals and the 10 principles. Now, how does it really work in practice? So the United Nations Global Compact operate through what we call its local networks. So it's really its local offices. There are, as we speak, 62 in the world. I'm with the UAE office, and we are creating much more also as we speak. And the role of the local network is to really localize the mandate of the United Nations Global Compact by aligning with local context. And what we mean by local context is public priorities, initiatives, regulations, and law. So we look at what the UAE is looking at, what are the national priorities. But we also, of course, look at the corporate sustainability landscape. So where are the businesses? What are their progress against the Sustainable Development Goals and the 10 principles? Where are the gaps that we need to bridge? Where are the opportunities that we can build on? And so based on that, with the UAE specifically, we've identified priority areas, being, of course, climate action, with COP being hosted in the country, but also with the net zero a pledge that was made by the UAE to become net zero by 2050, we had to make sure that we got the companies also on board and make sure that they contribute to that drive. Also gender balance. As you probably know, the government of the UAE has 50% female across all the ministries, but it's not the case from a business perspective. If you look at boardrooms, they are male dominated. leadership positions are mainly maintained by men. So we also have to make sure that we address this more specifically. Now, moving forward, we're also looking at sustainable finance. I mean, you've heard it through this COP. There is an adaptation fund being put together. Obviously, private funding and private finance is significant. We have to make sure that there are flows going towards the SDGs. There is, I think, 3 trillion or 3 billion. Don't take my word for it. It's a huge difference. I cannot remember now, but there is a significant SDG financing gap. And within trillion. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Minimum 2.2 trillion gap. Yeah.
Thank you. And this is being recorded. That's great. So a 3 trillion SDG financing gap. And the UN Global Compact actually created a CFO coalition which aims to engage CFOs so that they can really align the investment with the Sustainable Development Goals. So the aim is to localize it here. We know there's a significant capital market in the UAE that's relatively being untapped. So we want to make sure that we are driving this forward. Then biodiversity is also becoming, it should have been for a long time, but it's only getting, I guess, more interest now, especially with Her Excellency Razan as the high-level champion for COP28. Biodiversity is one of her key priorities. And also within the Global Compact, at least in HQ, they've been working on demystifying the concept of biodiversity, so businesses really understand dependencies with nature, but also the impacts they have on nature, so we can really move the needle on that. And then youth, of course. Especially in the Middle East, we have a dynamic youth population, and we have to make sure that youth is included in climate-related decision-making processes, which is why we are also working on making sure that companies work with their youth, upskill them, empower them, so they can be part of the solutions. And essentially also one important point that I want to mention is that we have to make sure that we translate the benefits of corporate sustainability from a business perspective. Because from a business perspective, it has to make sense, right? So this is also what we do within the Global Compact. We make sure that through our programs that really upskill companies and equips them with the knowledge, the resources, so that they can set targets aligned with all of those key thematics, that there is one segment where we tell them, okay, this is how you have to speak to your leadership, this is how you have to speak to your board, so that you translate the SDGs and the benefits of driving this forward from a business perspective. And this has been extremely beneficial. We've heard from companies on the ground that probably one of the main barriers to work on climate or work on gender is resistance from the leadership. So this is what we've also been doing internally.
Thank you so much. Wonderful work that you're doing. I would like to ask you a question. How do you make sure that the youth is actually considered in the transition?
Thank you. So yes, so youth is obviously critical, and obviously, so just transition, first of all, there is no universal definition for it, so it's also hard to drive this forward when you cannot really tell, okay, this is what it means universally. But what we know is that when there is a transition, which is not happening fast enough, but it's still happening, you have new jobs being created, but other jobs becoming obsolete, right? So you have to make sure that everyone is moving forward in the same direction and no one is left behind. So this is the concept of a just transition. Now, from a youth perspective, there is a responsibility from companies to make sure that the youth is upskilled so that they can take on those new jobs, and a responsibility from academia to make sure that whatever they teach them across university prepares them to match the emerging green job market demand. So we've been working, not in the UAE specifically, but mainly at HQ, which is something that we will be implementing next year. But we have two key platforms. The first one is a flagship program called the SDG Innovator for Young Professional program, which engages young professional, and by young professional we mean below 35 years old. So we engage them with challenges within the company so that they can come up with innovative solutions. So they are exposed to sustainability. They are also introduced to the concept of the SDGs, sustainability. They don't have to come from a specific department. And so they have this upskilling experience to be part of the solution within the company. Now, from an academia perspective, we have a sister initiative called Principle of Responsible Management Education. It's a sister initiative of the UN, and it's an initiative that works with business schools to make sure that they widespread sustainability within the business courses. And again, with the ideas that when those business students graduate, they are they match the current market demand when it comes to jobs, because we know that there is a skills mismatch, and we have to make sure that we bridge that gap.
Thank you so much for your answer. And now the floor is Camila's from NYUAD.
Thank you very much. So it's good to make this transition from what Chantal and Adele said, because I'm here more representing the academic side. I'm a professor at NYU at the moment, and I've been many years working in France as well, and I'm Brazilian originally. I want to share a little bit about my experience in research and teaching on corporate sustainability. Some years ago, one example I can give is that so I'm part of the PRIME, so the PRIME that you just mentioned, Principles of Responsible Management Education. I've been in the gender equality group at the beginning, working group, in which we did an interesting job of doing a repository. So with other professors around the world, we did a repository of case studies and research which had, let's say, more gender equality. So let's say business cases of in which there were women CEOs or others, so that other academics could go and let's say use this repository, like to show the students that there are also other kinds of business cases. So in terms of research, so 6 years ago, when there was a warning from the climate scientists about rising temperatures and other issues related to climate change, biodiversity in the world, my colleague and I, we did an interview with Carlos Nobre, who is a very, let's say, scientist from the IPCC, right? So he knows a lot about Amazon, and we did an interview with him to try to understand better how we can create a dialogue between management scholars. So I'm typically a person who works as a professor in a business school, so preparing let's say, the students for the future. And we came to let's say, through his interview, we saw that there's a big gap between what scientists say and how policies are made in organizations, right, in society. So we have asked him which are of course, all the SDGs are linked, right, Sustainable Development Goals, but which are the SDGs he wanted to call attention to. And we wrote a paper on the three most important, according to him, which were, first of all, gender, like women and girls' education around the world. He called attention to this important issue. The second one was the decarbonizing, right? The climate change and the rising temperatures. So to decarbonize more and more, let's say, the organization's activities. And the third one was peace. And at the time, for me, peace, of course, we didn't have, at the time, we didn't have the wars that are going on today. And for me, it seemed curious that he talked about peace, but for him, it was the most difficult one to tackle. So this paper, it's published. So if you want to take a look, I can send the reference. So this is an example of research. But another one, which is linked to Chantal's example, is that paper that we wrote also on the Amazon region, and it's also linked with cosmetics, because we interviewed some quebradeiras de coco, some babaçu coconut breakers, and babaçu is a very specific tree that only exists in this specific region of Amazon. And Body Shop, so this international company, Body Shop International, uses this oil to produce creams and oils for the body. And very interestingly, this babaçu breaker women, they use this oil and they extract this oil artisanally, in an artisanal manner, and Body Shop International really value this way of extracting the oil. So it's a very interesting case of community organizing, because this community babaçu breakers, they could engage in an engaged manner, create a law in 1986 in which they have access to the babaçu wherever they are, so they can go and they can extract the coconuts. And it's interesting to see the link between these coconut breakers with the trees. Some of them consider the trees as the mothers, right? So it's very interesting to see as well. So in this paper, we could see the link between community organizing, biodiversity conservation, and within the global value chains international with Body Shop. So it's a very positive case, of course, not without tensions, but a positive case of linking business, biodiversity conservation, and community organizing, especially of women. And in terms of teaching, indeed, being in the Prime for many years, and I've been in the Global Compact also meeting 2015 there in New York, and I remember I started to try to integrate more the SDGs into the classes. And there was one initiative at the time called Aim to Flourish. Maybe Adele has not heard. Maybe it was something that was not official, but a university in the United States started doing it. And basically it was to ask the students to interview CEOs, directors, and managers from companies, and to try to identify which SDGs they could, let's say, link with the activities of the companies, right? So it was very interesting because the students had to already contact the director, so it was already a practice for them. And in many cases they did, it's also on the internet. I'm going to cite one example here, but there were examples of edible forks and knives, for example. Also one example I remember is from Altered Company, which is a Scandinavian company that created a device to save water. So if you buy, let's say if when the consumer buys this device called Nozzle, this device allows the water to make a mist. So you kind of save from 75 to 98% of water that you would have used otherwise, right? So it's a very interesting way, because once they give this, let's say they interview the managers, they understand the practice, they can link with the SDGs. And then there's a platform, it's called Aim to Flourish, and then in which there's a kind of competition, like a healthy competition between the students to see which case is more interesting, which case brings more, let's say, of the SDGs to be, let's say, more spread and more known among this community. So I remember that this case, Altered Company won the competition at the time. So it was an interesting way to introduce SDGs into the class. And I'm happy to know that there are other initiatives that I maybe will use in the future as well. So I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Camila. It's really interesting to know how you incorporate the SDGs and the corporate sustainability in your research and also in teaching. So I think you elaborated a lot in that. We would like to move to our final presentation by Bruna. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to use my time to talk about social entrepreneurship and how social enterprises bring social impact, although many times in a small scale, in a local scale, like you were talking about before. And I'm going to speak from my positionality as a researcher in scaling social enterprises, and also as a social entrepreneur from the Global South. So I'm going to start by doing something that's a bit hard, which is trying to define what is a social enterprise. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to try to do that because it's actually very difficult to define it. But I'm going to say that it has two defining characteristics, let's say. One of them is that it's a hybrid organization, so it's transiting between different sectors, usually the market and the social sector. And what that actually means is that we create some kind of income generating activity, or we employ market practices from the private sector in what we do. And the second defining characteristic is that we are pursuing a social or an environmental goal, right? So that actually positions us as a kind of ideal type purpose-driven organization, which is something that's very widely discussed now. And for me, a purpose-driven organization is really one that aligns the mission, the vision, the values, and how you are driving your company and how you're driving your organization, right? So it's the why, the what, the how, the when you're taking decisions. So differently than corporations, which are pursuing profit per se, social enterprises, the end game is not necessarily profit, although it is very welcome, of course, but what we're actually pursuing is the social change, right? Because we're purpose driven. So whatever profit we're lucky to have, it's not always easy to have a profit as a social enterprise, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that later. We reinvest in our purpose. And then the idea of scaling profit is really so that we can do more and better. So we're serving more people better, right? So now bringing that discussion to my organization in Brazil, I am a co-founder of EVA Institute. So we actually founded an organization that's integrating education for sustainable development to the Brasilia curriculum. And we're offering specialized professional training to teachers. And the whole idea to teachers in public schools, so that is an important detail. And what we're trying to do is to localize the very global discussions to the local realities. We do it until the municipal level, and if we can, until the community, the school community level, because we understand that students actually engage more and learn more when it's relatable to their lives, right? So to the issues that are relevant to their communities. And by doing so, we hope to stimulate their citizenship for a sustainable planet. And this is actually something that is in the NDCs, right? So education for climate change, but we go a little bit broader because we're integrating all the SDGs into the Brazilian curricula, and also that includes climate change. So there was a point when we were being founded about 3 years ago in which we had to make a decision of if we were going to be for-profit or non-for-profit as an organization. And we ended up making the decision of being non-for-profit, understanding that that decision actually excludes some possibilities of financing. For example, we will never be able to get finance from impact investors because they expect a return on investment, which we have decided we will not go for that. And the reason why we made that decision is because what we're offering is not a targeted solution, like it's not a product or a vaccine or glasses for the very poor at a cheaper price. It's something that is more systemic in nature, it's education. So we didn't want to mission drift. Let's say if we had a for-profit mentality, we might have to compromise some of our decisions so that we could have a profit. So we made a very conscious decision to then be a non-profit organization, right? So to summarize some of the things that the strategies that we have done as EVA Institute to amplify our impact, I think things that we do is we try to partner with different organizations at different levels. So obviously companies and other NGOs in our ecosystems, academia as well, a lot, and local governments, because in Brazil, education and it connects with one of your points as well, because you want to educate people coming out of universities, but we actually have to start from an early age so that we can get them to understand all of this, and the green skills can come gradually later, right? So the connection with local governments, academia, etc. Another thing that is obviously very needed for social enterprises is to be financially sustainable. It's always a challenge. So what we try to do is have a revenue mix as much as possible. So some income generating activities, but also grants and other philanthropic funds. And last but not least, to guarantee the impact, which is actually something that's very important for our legitimacy as a social enterprise, we have to measure impact from a very early start. So the data collection is very important, and how we're going to measure impact. So in our case, I'm already perhaps going into a little bit more than I should, but in our case, what we're doing is we're aligned with the SDGs with 4.7 specifically, and we're also incorporating the SDG impact standard for enterprises as much as possible. It's a gradual work. And because of our links with academia as well, we're going to start a project, a 3-year project in Brazil, in which we want to develop some indicators of our own, let's say, but we are aligning with the global practices as well. So I'm going to stop for there so we leave the discussion.
Thank you so much, Bruna. It's very interesting and very amazing job that all these women are doing. For myself, I'm also a social entrepreneur. I'm based in Dubai, and I'm working on a startup called Ecocentric, which is a socially certified enterprise by MAN, which is the Authority of Social Contributions in Abu Dhabi. And we recently have announced our soft launch, so soon you will be able to order your food. Thank you. Plastic and emission free. So what we do, we provide the platform where you can order your food online, and vendors pack your food in reusable containers, and we deliver it emission free. So we are tackling SDGs 12 and 11. So yeah, thank you for having me here. And now I'd like to open discussion with the audience. If anyone has questions for our panelists, this is the time.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Darsal Danezli. I'm a PhD student in international environmental law at Sorbonne University, and I do have a question for Adel. I was wondering, how do you make sure that the private sector is enough involved in all of these objectives? Do they have a responsibility? Do they feel liable with the objectives? Or I'm speaking especially in the UAE. Do companies here feel enough involved, or do they make do they create their own objectives? Do they interpret themselves, or do you give them norms and they need to respect them? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. So the UN Global Compact is a voluntary initiative. So there is a reporting system, an annual reporting system. It's a universal questionnaire that feeds into the Sustainable Development Goals and the 10 principles. So each company has to report on around 66 questions that fall under human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Now, we don't check if what they do is not credible per se, but if it's good enough, because it's an honorable system where you have the CEO that signs the questionnaire. So we believe that whatever they report on is the reality. What we do, however, even though we are a voluntary initiative, we push for initiatives and framework that are internationally recognized. So let's take, for example, net zero targets. So we don't want companies, it's not that we don't want, but we strongly encourage companies to not have self-declared targets. What we do instead is we push the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative is an initiative founded by the UN Global Compact, CDP, WWF, and WRI. And it basically sets company on the 1.5 pathway and therefore gets the targets validated so it aligns with the goal of the Paris Agreement. So we know that if a company has a science-based target approved, it means that it's credible and it's robust enough to set us on the 1.5 pathway. We push a lot for that, but again, because it's voluntary, we cannot really oblige companies to do it. We've had good response over the past year. I think it's symptomatic of COP28 being hosted here, but we went from 2 SBTI committed companies to 18 in the UAE alone, and it actually makes up for most of the region, SBTI committed companies in the region. If you take gender, for example, it's the same principle. It's not, of course, the same mechanism as the SBTI, but UN Women, together with the UN Global Compact, created the Women Empowerment Principles, which is a set of principles that we ask companies to align with so that they push for female representation, participation, and leadership. And so again, this is something that we push, and not only we push for that, but we also provide programs, 6 months program, we actually call them mini MBAs, that gets companies through workshops, on-demand courses, peer-to-peer learning, so they can actually exchange amongst each other with companies from different sectors, different countries as well in the region, so that they can set targets aligned with the WEPs for gender or with the SBTI for climate.
Do we have more questions from the audience? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amna Noor. I'm a master's student at Sorbonne University in environmental law. I also recently just co-launched a business in the food waste sector. We're also socially certified by MAN. My question is for the panel because I think it intersects with all the points of this discussion. It's mainly about what a new business can do when we're talking about startups and limited bandwidth in terms of resources, workforce. What can you elucidate perhaps on what to prioritize in terms when it comes to reporting sustainability and like proving that legitimacy? What can we perhaps prioritize to balance profitability as well as our purpose that we're trying to achieve?
I guess it's a bit directed at my experience. So prioritize. I think when you're starting, you have to start small in what you're trying to collect data because it's not a simple process, right? If you are a for-profit business, I really recommend that you look into this SDG standard that I told you about because it gives you all of the roadmap of what you have to collect, what you have to communicate. It's really easy to apply for starting businesses. So I can share that with you later. Yeah.
Perhaps another source at UNCTAD, we have an Emprotech Center, so in 42 countries, and we also have the ISAR, International Standard of Accounting and Reporting, where we have 33 core indicators that are aligned with the SDGs. So you can, so these 33 would be anything, not just what is material, but what society is expecting increasingly from civil society. So they're called ISAR, International Standard of Accounting and Reporting, 33 core indicators.
Do we have more questions?
Hello, my name is Catherine Holland. I'm a student at New York University, Abu Dhabi. And I'm studying legal studies, hoping to become an international environmental lawyer. And I had a question regarding the social enterprises. So I was hoping that you could speak a little bit on the complexity of funding from local governments, especially when new political regimes kind of conflict with protection of biodiversity. I know specifically in the sphere of Brazil that you were talking about, there was a new leadership that failed to protect indigenous rights and biodiversity in the region. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how beneficial you think that is.
So just to see if I understand, I'm not a specialist on biodiversity, so maybe Beatriz can answer that question better than me. But if I understand correctly, you want to understand the role of local governments in enabling this kind of project to happen? Yeah, I mean, political will is obviously very necessary in any kind of social or environmental intervention that you will have. We started in a government that was perhaps against the environmental agenda, to put it lightly. Now things have shifted, so it's a breath of fresh air for us. But because we're dealing mostly with local governments, it varies in Brazil. What we try to do, especially because we're still in the process of scaling our initiative, we try to go to fertile grounds. So to the places where we have good relationships and that we know there's an alignment, because we also believe in the contagion phenomena. When you start doing something that's interesting and that the schools have show protagonism, then the local leadership say, okay, I want that in my municipality as well. So we start in fertile grounds. I don't know if you want to add something on biodiversity, but it's not my specialty.
Here we have another question.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Camila. And as you mentioned, the case of Body Shop and also Natura case was mentioned. And since we live in a very capitalistic environment and economy. I just wanted to hear your insights into the communication, the strategies to communicate the sustainability to the audience, like how to drive this interest, because I see that it's a very important topic, but do you see through your research and how do you perceive the collaboration and the response from the public towards these initiatives?
Thank you. So it's a very good question because it refers to both, I think, my case, but also what Chantal was talking about. So in our paper, we even put some pictures of what Body Shop publicizes as when they produce and when they sell the products made with the babasu oil. So you can see pictures in the Body Shop website of coconut breakers, breaking the coconut and working with the production of this oil. And this is interesting because the consumers value this kind of producing the oil, look more artisanal and not using machines, they could increase the price, right? So Body Shop, so it was a very positive cycle because Body Shop could increase the price of the oil. The coconut breakers could win more in terms of liters, right, of oil sold. And it could contribute to the biodiversity preservation of these specific trees, right? So it was a positive thing. But of course, that in the paper, we also show the tensions because sometimes these babasu coconut breakers were using the coconuts from other owners, right? So there's also in Brazil the question of cattle, right, being produced and being let's say raised, and let's say the trade-off between the coconut breakers, the babasu trees, and the cattle. So it's something that has been going on for decades, but it's a very positive case because it's now that they have this law, right, and we were talking about political will, so they could force, in a way, not force, but engage so much in community organizing that they also were responsible for, in many parts, for this law of free babasu, so that they can access it. So it's a business that is already put into place. So it was beneficial in terms of price as well because the consumers now engage more in this kind of product. So they're willing to pay more for this kind of production. So I think maybe Chantal has something to add.
And I'm not sure if it's directly related, but I know the title is corporate sustainability, but I really hope we're going to move away from corporate sustainability and really start by, because what these people are doing, right? What you're doing, the entrepreneurs in the room, you see a problem, you try to fix it, and then you try to find a way to make money out of it. And that's the way that all the economic models should be. So the UN Economist Network is basically created, I'd love to work with people like you on this, because we created, when we had the chief economist, we created the new economics for sustainable development, because everybody was talking about green. But what if you're an economist in one of our member countries, but green is not your priority? Say you're an island, blue economy is your priority, or the care economy is your priority, circular economy, social solidarity economy, creative economy, and so on, right? Frugal innovation, frugal economy. And so we have a policy brief on each of those. And increasingly what it should be is that's the business model, and they get recognized. And it's not an expenditure because these people are producing beyond market values. And it should be recognized in the laws, in the fiscal policies, in the taxation system. And it's not right now. It's not recognized in our procurement policies. So the awareness with member states also at the local level, but also at the national level, to ensure that we have 2 billion people pretty much involved in cooperatives, mutuals, and it's not recognized. You ask most member states, they don't know. So we just passed a resolution at the UN in April on social solidarity economy for sustainable development, because it advanced every single one of the SDGs. Inclusivity, equality, gender equality, biodiversity, it's like a superpower tool, and yet most of our member states are not aware of it, even if it's under their eyes, because we've not documented the economic, the social, and the environmental impact that these enterprises are creating. So this is something we're working now. We have an interagency task force on social solidarity economy, where we have a mandate to help member states put in place policies to support the social solidarity economy. Second, to have the UN integrate in our program. You guys to integrate it in your education system, because why don't we know? because it's not integrated. It's not in our, we all went to university, we all have PhD. We never heard of social solidarity economy in any one of our classes. I mean, that's pretty amazing when you think about it, right? And then we have a mandate to the multilateral development banks, we talk about financing, to actually develop a financial instrument to support those, specific instrument to support them. And then a mandate to write the Secretary General report on what are the good practices. You talk about the business model for women. We need to do that for those social enterprises. And so that when you decide whether it's going to be a for-profit or not-for-profit, off the shelf, you have some example of not-for-profit as well, not just the for-profit one, which makes it easier. So I it's not exactly, but I think the awareness is not just the consumer, it's also our decision makers.
So this goes back to what you were saying, Bruna, earlier about, I know you're in the midst of developing a strategy for monitoring impact, and then what you were saying about how do people become aware of it. As someone who researches social impact, I'm trying to understand what are your biggest challenges to actually proving impact. I mean, you're a small fish in a big ocean, and I think that's what the issue is, right? We don't have the data to say where is this impact and how do we make it replicable then, right? And how do you get the additional funding? So any thoughts on that?
That's why I was saying start small, because it's better that you have some indicators that you're following and that you have your V0 where you started, where it was before your intervention, obviously, and that you're collecting points and you know which instruments that you're going to use to collect points in the different groups that you're working with, so that then you can measure your impact along the way. And as you become a stronger organization with more organizational muscle, then you can become a little bit more complex in your monitoring and evaluation systems. But sometimes what organizations try to do is try to do too much too soon. So I would say start with some indicators that are very targeted to your intervention and what you want, what you say you're going to deliver, right? And for that, you have to have a very clear theory of change and a very clear log frame, which is something that sometimes these organizations are not prepared to do. So a challenge for organizations like social enterprises is that you have to have this mix between a business acumen, but also the language and the frameworks of the development field. So it can be a bit challenging. You have to try to balance these skills in-house.
Thank you. What do you think that larger oil and gas corporate companies should do better to create tangible social impact?
Non-controversial question. I don't know how many of you watched the Trade Day. The UN Secretary General Special Envoy on Climate Change and Just Transition was on the panel. He was asked, so should the oil and gas be at the table? And he said, well, they should be at the table when they do their part. And right now, they're basically investing 2 to 3% in renewable energy. And so, you know, it's they need to do something on social, but they need to do something. I mean, it's social because it's a just transition, right? But a just transition would imply that they invest more than 2 to 3% on this. But I just want to get back to what you asked, because a lot of companies go to the environmental because we have metrics for it and it's easy to measure how much renewable energy, how much energy efficiency, how much water, quantifiable. Social is so hard, but we can't just give up and wash our hand and say wave our hand and say we can't do it. We actually need to get together and speed that up, because that's the one that we need to really develop. And I don't see enough going on there in terms of research. And I hope that with the resolution, it's going to create more financing to work on the documentation of the social impact, because it's social and solidarity economy. But right now, there's so little. Even in university, I don't, unless you tell me there's more, but I don't see a lot. In the private sector is especially in the US, it's going towards social, but there's no clear indicator, easy use indicators.
I'm going to add something else. I think because we all try to get to numbers, because numbers are easier to understand, we end up reporting like, we trained 1,000 teachers. Okay, but what does that mean? What is the social change that came out of that? So what we're doing in my project specifically, what we're trying to measure is the change in behavior of the students because of the teacher training. So these are the kinds of indicators that we use. So what are the projects that began after we implemented the program as a result of that? So that is a measure of change.
What you said, the last part, it really strikes. Do we have more questions? It's amazing how the audience is engaged. Well done.
Hi, I'm Farah. I can't give much experience in terms of education as I'm still in high school. But I have some aspirations in the economical and finance territory, and I definitely want to take some importance as a young person in the environment, knowing how destroyed our world is becoming. But I want to speak on a national level, knowing the UN and how many organizations are put in place and the resolutions being passed and all these efforts. Yet again, we have no, the advocacy is there, but the effects are still in place. So I'm wondering, what are capable things that we're able to do as a future after all these resolutions are being put in place by you guys who have their careers at the moment? What is it that we're able to do in terms of, because each country has their own business goals and their own economical goals, with most of them being in a linear economy. So some might be aiming to different types of economies with different goals, especially with being in a business market. So how can we proceed to prioritize the environment, but also keep with the circular economy and profit going, as that's what funds most of the markets and economies today?
Well, first, we do understand the importance of youth, and as you know, Secretary General has sent a youth bureau here. We had the young climate negotiators on as many of the panel that we had as possible, because we think it's important to get the voice of the intergenerational value. I really hope that by the time, first of all, you can have a voice in ensuring that the new model. And one of the things, if you haven't finished, when you go to university, there's this debate now coming back on the top of the agenda, which is Adam Smith actually the father of the capitalist system, or is he the father of the social economy? And, because if you read his books, The Invisible Hand happened once, and the clearing of the market through supply and demand is 700 pages later. And so, no, but we need the youth to basically push us to say we need new business model. And then once you have the new business model, don't ask me then that once I created my company to fit the investment model that you have. Because that's where the problem is. And you go to the bank and they say, oh, but you need to fit my model. It's like, no, you need to change the model, your investment model, to fit my new business model, which are all these models we're talking about. And, there's so much we can do, but you need to push, and we need to support you, is what I would say.
I just want to build on that, at least from a private sector perspective and global compact perspective. I think there's enough burden on you guys. So it's the responsibility, and I know it's much easier to say than said, because obviously we see that the voices of young people is not always included, but it's mainly the responsibility of businesses and non-businesses as well to work together to make sure that your voice is included in decision-making processes and just in the work of the organization as well. So I don't want to say just sit tight, but it's obviously, we see, such as you, we see that you are very much engaged, and it's not your responsibility alone.
With this question, we might have to conclude our discussion panel. We're right on time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for the panelists. And thank you for inviting me to moderate. We hope we are able to derive what we came here for. And I'm looking forward to the next panel discussions. Thank you.
Group photo again because